Ever since version 2.3, Wuthering Waves has made a big shift in the way they handle the character quests. Instead of the traditional companion quests, they shifted to an approach where they add the story of the characters directly into the main story. This is a kind of recent trend among gacha games, observed in other titles like Genshin or Honki Story Rail as well. And for a lot of players, this approach did not land well, especially after the first main story quest of Lynae in version 3.0. The main complaint I see is the fact that the main story feels disjointed, the pacing is all over the place, and instead of pushing the narrative forward, the plot feels like it's taking a random detour to deal with a character's personal trauma. Because of this, a lot of people ask for the return of the old companion quests. This way, people who are interested in a certain character can learn more about them and enjoy their story, while people who want to see a more organic progression of the main story, instead of being distracted every patch while Rover gathers his new wife, they can enjoy the main plot without detours. But is really the absence of the character quests the real issue here? Or it's how the character stories are integrated into the main narrative that's bad? Because I personally do not think that we need to go back to the companion quests. Instead, I think that Kuro needs to learn how to integrate the stories of the characters into the main story in a more organic way and provide a better narrative experience. When I play the main story in a game, I expect a sense of progress towards the center conflict of the current setting. In this case, Lynae. But in some recent patches, I felt like the main story often paused to focus on the personal struggles of newly introduced characters. Look, emotional moments felt self-contained and the conflicts didn't advance the larger plot. And don't get me wrong, it's important to have these things, but not when they go against the progression of the main quest. If Kuro insists on integrating companion quests into the main narrative, they need to do a better job at homogenizing them. The issue here is not that the stories of these characters are bad. I loved Lynae's story, for example, but the issue is that her story is shoved in my face during the main story in a way that felt forced and unnatural. The main story feels like an interruption rather than a natural progression of the plot. And on top of this, there is another layer of frustration. And that is the fact that Wuthering Waves is a gacha game, so I know exactly why Kuro Game is doing this. The deliberate decision to handicap the main story is intentional in order to sell a character. This is very obvious since character-focused stories align with their banners. Being emotionally invested into the story of a character will automatically want to make people spend, and I feel like many people can tell that these stories often exist not to be good, but to sell them something. This creates some kind of narrative cynicism when even a very well written character can feel manipulative when it's framed too obvious as marketing. On the other hand, I understand Kuro's perspective. From a development and business perspective, this makes a lot of sense. I assume that many people don't really play character quests that much, especially if they don't have an active interest in a character, or they just keep around. So by integrating their stories into the main story quest, Kuro forces players to engage with them. Everybody gets to understand their motivation and hopefully for Solon's next act, form an attachment strong enough to pull for them. Look, if you like the design of the character and the gameplay style, you will pull regardless. But having the character's story shoved in your face during the main story may create an emotional attachment that would have not existed if their story was told in a separate quest. This is a great way to convert skippers into spenders. And unfortunately, this is the reality of gacha games. But narrative convenience and narrative quality are not the same thing, so I want Kuro to do better. Sell me all the characters that you want, but sell them to me in a way that doesn't sacrifice the narrative quality to put in a glorified ad. When a character's personal story halts the main plot, it feels like filler. But when it reshapes the main plot, it feels earned. Make characters have a reason to be there that aligns with the main plot. And WoW has done that in the past. Just look back at the main stories from 2.5 and 2.7. Kuro did an incredible job integrating the stories of Phrolova and Galbrena into the main quest. And why is that? Well, because their personal stories played a direct role in the main narrative. Their motivations were in direct conflict with the main antagonist of that patch, Fenrico and Leviathan. Learning about their past actually helped us understand more about the world and the situation we're in, and maybe the most important thing, the choices these characters made in the main story actively impacted its trajectory. Their character development didn't interrupt the plot, it was the plot. On the other hand, I feel like the second quest of 2.6 and now the first quest of 3.0 are the biggest offenders in terms of character story integration in the main plot. I really hope that Kuro will take in the feedback and improve this issue in the future. Other gacha games already proved that it's possible to tell a good narrative that combines both narrative progression and character quests well. The two examples I want to give are Honkai Impact 3rd and Honkai Star Rail. First, HI3. HI3 is a bit different because it never had character quests to begin with. Instead, it always told a cohesive narrative centered around the characters that went hand in hand with the main plot. The character arcs are built to work with the main plot from the start. This makes the progression feel natural. You never feel like the story tries to separate the characters from the main plot. And you may say, oh Homu, but Honkai Impact 3rd is not an open world game, it's not a game where you visit different regions. Okay, let's talk about HSR, which I'll give you that it's not really an open world, but that doesn't really matter in this context because it's a game where you go from planet to planet, so it follows the same formula. HSR, just like WoA, started with companion quests and ended up abandoning them to integrate the stories of the characters into the main plot. And while during Penacony I felt like this approach didn't work sometimes, Hoyo perfected it in Amphorius. Amphorius is the best example of how to align a character's personal story with the main plot. Of course, HSR and Hoyo in general have other issues such as bad pacing, verbose dialogue and awful presentation, all things that WoA excels at, by the way, but the idea is that each game has its strengths and weaknesses, and I wish that they would learn from each other. I do not want this to become a Kuro versus Hoyo thing, this is just poorly objective analysis. Look, stories have a lot of elements that need to be crafted in order to work as a cohesive unit. I can see that Kuro Games puts a lot of work and passion to create these worlds and characters, but at the same time a good writer knows how to align every aspect of the story in order to make sense for the overall plot. Some of you may know, some may not, but I finished film studies and screenwriting in college, so I know what makes a good story and how a good character should be written. There is this book called Story by Robert McKee. In fact, let me see if I can find it. This is it. This is the book, and this book is considered by many to be the Bible of every screenwriter. And while not everybody is a fan of McKee, I learned a lot from this book. It's usually the first book people will recommend you to read when you study screenwriting. I read the book multiple times, and I still remember to this day one line very clearly. True character is revealed by the choices a character makes under pressure. This means that the character development works best when the characters are tested by the main plot, not when they are removed from it. Another great writer, John Turby, says in his book The Anatomy of the Story that a story fails when character desire and plot movement are misaligned. In other words, if a character arc pauses the story, it weakens both. If it advances the story, it strengthens both. And unfortunately, I feel like in Wuthering Waves, character stories often pause the main plot instead of advancing it. Another big problem that isn't really unique to Wuthering Waves, but RPGs in general, is the silent, or near silent in this case, protagonist. Dialogue is one of the most powerful tools for character development, but when the protagonist barely challenges other characters, with a few exceptions again, shout out to 2.5's main story quest and Phrolova. It rarely expresses its own ideas and drives conversation. The other characters end up talking at them instead of talking with them. This leads to plain monologues, artificial intimacy, and shallow relationships built on an artificial sense of pondering to the player, which may feel nice short term. Look, I also love gathering my wives, but it erodes at the narrative long term. There is this great article by Michael Gregorowitz called "You're the Hero, Silent Protagonists Ruin Good Stories," where he talks about the issue of silent protagonists in RPGs and how they, well, ruin the story. If you're interested in learning more about this issue, I highly recommend reading it. Maybe it will change your perspective. I will leave a link in the description. So, should Wuthering Waves go back to companion quests? No, I do not think so. Instead, it should commit to integrate the stories of the characters into the main story quest in a more organic way. They already proved that they are capable of doing that, so please, Kuro, try to approach future quests in the same way as you did back in 2.5. Tell me, what did you think? Do you want Kuro to bring back character quests? Let's have a civilized discussion in the comments. Peace.